For centuries, the Catholic Church has stood as a pillar of faith, guiding millions through its teachings. Yet, in an ironic twist, some of its most devoted clergy now find themselves cast aside, not for scandalous crimes or moral failings, but for defending the very doctrines they vowed to uphold. Why would a priest, devoted to serving God and his congregation, be silenced by the very institution he swore to protect? And if their only crime is adherence to orthodoxy, what does that say about the direction in which the Church is heading? The answer lies in a growing internal divide, one that pits tradition against modernity, unwavering faith against institutional control. If you enjoy content that helps you grow spiritually, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and join our community for more inspiration. Let's get started. Priests who refuse to conform to new ideological shifts often find themselves marginalized, stripped of their parishes, and branded as outcasts. This issue, which is now commonly known as the cancellation of priests, is not an isolated one. It's a sign of a bigger problem within the Church. Rather than being disciplined for misconduct, these clergy members are punished for speaking truths that contradict the increasingly progressive stance of many church leaders. A priest who insists on the sanctity of traditional teachings is seen as a threat, while those who embrace doctrinal fluidity are welcomed. This selective suppression reveals an unsettling reality. The persecution of priests is not about justice, but about control. It is no longer enough for a priest to remain faithful to scripture and doctrine. His survival within the institution depends on his willingness to adapt, to soften his message, to avoid controversy, even if that means diluting fundamental truths. The bishops, who are supposed to lead their clergy, have become the ones who enforce this change in ideas. People who don't follow the rules are quickly removed, their views hushed, and their names erased. This crisis is not a recent development. Even decades ago, priests who resisted changes imposed by Vatican II faced similar opposition. They were ostracized, humiliated, and in extreme cases, even institutionalized. The pattern repeats itself today with renewed intensity as the battle for the soul of the Church continues. For those who dare to challenge this transformation, the consequences are severe. Their removal is not just administrative, it is symbolic. It sends a message to others that resistance is futile, that questioning authority comes at a price. And yet, despite the growing pressure to conform, there are still those who refuse to compromise, standing firm in their convictions even as they are pushed into exile. The authority of bishops has long been regarded as a pillar of stability within the Catholic Church, yet their growing inclination to silence dissenting voices has revealed a concerning shift. These high-ranking clergy, once seen as protectors of faith and tradition, now wield their influence to suppress those who refuse to conform. The priests who are targeted are not guilty of heresy or scandal, but rather of maintaining beliefs that were once considered foundational. There are moments when the world seems to shift beneath our feet, leaving us questioning everything we once believed to be stable. When long-standing values are challenged and familiar foundations begin to crack, finding guidance becomes essential. This is exactly what The Secret of Jesus' Apparitions offers, a path to clarity and peace through his revelations. This ebook goes into his prophecies and offers insight into what lies ahead. It's available for free in the pinned comment. Grab it now before the edition's gone. The pattern is unmistakable. Bishops, many of whom remain passive in the face of genuine moral corruption, act decisively only when a priest stands firm on orthodox teachings. When a priest upholds doctrine that does not align with the modernized vision of the Church, disciplinary measures are swift and unforgiving. The moment he challenges the prevailing narrative, he is met with reprimands, isolation, and in many cases, outright expulsion. This betrayal is particularly glaring considering that bishops are entrusted with the spiritual welfare of their clergy. Instead of guiding and supporting their priests, many have adopted the role of enforcers, ensuring compliance with ideological shifts rather than fidelity to tradition. Their actions send an unmistakable message. Adaptation is mandatory, and defiance will not be tolerated. The consequences extend beyond the priests themselves. Parishioners who once relied on their spiritual guidance are left without the voices they trusted. The removal of these priests creates an environment where only those willing to adjust their teachings remain, leading to a slow but deliberate transformation of doctrine. The faithful are left questioning whether the church they once knew still exists, or if it has become something unrecognizable. The reality is that this suppression is not merely about controlling individual priests, it is about reshaping the institution from within. By eliminating opposition, church leadership ensures that dissent is not only silenced, but erased. Priests who refuse to conform are not just dismissed, their reputations are tarnished, their influence is dismantled, and their life's work is reduced to whispers of defiance against an authority that no longer tolerates unwavering conviction. As these bishops tighten their grip on the church's direction, their motivations become increasingly suspect. Their passivity toward corruption stands in stark contrast to their aggression against tradition. The contradiction is impossible to ignore. Those who should be defending the faith are instead dismantling its foundations, leaving the faithful to wonder whose interests they truly serve. The reforms of Vatican II were introduced under the promise of renewal, yet their consequences have sparked decades of division. The Church, once a fortress of tradition, saw its foundations shaken as centuries-old practices were replaced with modernized adaptations. The Latin Mass, a cornerstone of Catholic worship, was suddenly sidelined, replaced with a vernacular liturgy that many faithful struggled to recognize. This shift was not merely cosmetic, it redefined the spiritual experience for millions, altering rituals that had remained unchanged for generations. Those who resisted the changes were quickly met with hostility. Priests who clung to the ancient rites found themselves branded as relics of a bygone era, accused of resisting progress. Some were stripped of their ministries, while others were pressured into submission. The expectation was clear: conform or face exile. The idea that the Church could evolve without severing its roots was dismissed, and those who questioned this break with tradition were marginalized. In moments of uncertainty, knowledge becomes a guiding light. If you're looking for understanding, don't forget, our free ebook is still available, but only for a limited time. Check the first pinned comment before it's gone. It was not only priests who felt the impact. Parishioners who had grown up with the traditional liturgy were suddenly left in unfamiliar territory. The sacred mystery they had once experienced in the solemnity of the Old Mass was replaced with a more casual, participatory format. When the focus moved from God to other people, the sense of respect that was at the heart of Catholic prayer began to fade. Not many people could find the traditions that their parents did, and for many, the Church no longer felt like home. Critics of the reforms argue that Vatican II marked the beginning of a theological dilution. By attempting to modernize, the Church risked losing the essence of what made it distinct. The embrace of ecumenism, while presented as an effort to foster unity, raised concerns that Catholicism was compromising its doctrines in an attempt to align with other faiths. The belief that the Church alone held the fullness of truth was increasingly questioned, and the lines between Catholic teaching and secular influence grew blurred. These changes did not occur in isolation. They were accompanied by a broader cultural shift that saw faith being reshaped to fit modern sensibilities. The emphasis on tradition was gradually replaced by an openness to reinterpretation, a willingness to adapt in ways that previous generations would have found unthinkable. What had once been seen as unchangeable was now subject to revision, leaving many to wonder whether the church was still standing on the same foundation it had been built upon. When Mel Gibson set out to bring The Passion of the Christ to life, he expected opposition from secular Hollywood, but what he didn't anticipate was the resistance from within the church itself. Seeking support for a film that portrayed the crucifixion with unfiltered intensity, he approached the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, USCCB, only to be met with indifference. The very leaders entrusted with upholding the faith seemed eager to distance themselves from a project that aimed to rekindle devotion. Their rejection was not subtle. Instead of rallying behind a film that depicted the central sacrifice of Christianity, they treated it as an inconvenience. Some avoided discussion altogether, while others dismissed it as unnecessary. For an institution built on the blood of martyrs, the hesitancy to endorse a cinematic portrayal of Christ's suffering was telling. It revealed a growing discomfort within church leadership toward anything that might challenge the status quo or ignite deeper spiritual reflection. This reluctance extended beyond the Passion. The same bishops who shied away from supporting a film that aligned with Catholic beliefs had, for decades, welcomed cultural shifts that diluted those very teachings. They had permitted modernist interpretations of doctrine, softened stances on moral issues, and, in some cases, remained silent in the face of blatant irreverence. Yet, when faced with an opportunity to reaffirm the faith through powerful storytelling, they turned their backs. The rejection was not merely a matter of personal distaste for the film. It was symptomatic of a broader transformation within the church's leadership, a shift away from firm theological conviction and toward institutional self-preservation. The fear of controversy, of being perceived as too rigid or unyielding, had taken precedence over the responsibility to defend the faith. This hesitancy to engage with unapologetic expressions of Catholicism was not an isolated event, but part of a pattern that had been unfolding for decades. Many have already secured their copy of this powerful resource. Have you? If gaining clarity matters to you, make sure to grab yours before the last few copies run out. The link is in the first pinned comment. That which stood out the most was how different the bishop's hesitation was from how the faithful responded. Even though church leaders didn't like it, the Passion of the Christ hit home with people all over the world. It became a cultural phenomenon, proving that there was still a hunger for authenticity in religious expression. While church leaders hesitated, everyday believers embraced the film, demonstrating that the spiritual pulse of Catholicism was still alive, not within the halls of bureaucracy, but in the hearts of those who refused to let it fade. When the image of the Pachamama was brought into St. Peter's Basilica, the reaction was immediate and polarizing. What was this statue, an indigenous fertility figure, doing at the heart of Catholicism? Was it a gesture of inclusion or a symbolic shift in the Church's priorities? For many, it represented a moment of rupture, an unsettling display that blurred the boundaries between devotion and syncretism. The controversy was not merely about a wooden idol placed in a sacred space. It was about what it signified, a growing trend within the Vatican that seemed to welcome external spiritual influences while suppressing traditional Catholic practices. The same church that had once guarded its sacred traditions with unwavering resolve now appeared open to gestures that some saw as diluting its core beliefs. The tension was palpable. Why was there room for indigenous symbols in the Vatican while Latin Mass communities were being restricted? Critics pointed to this as part of a broader agenda under Pope Francis, one that prioritized inclusivity at the cost of clarity. The event was framed as a moment of cultural respect, but for many, it felt like a deliberate departure from the Church's historical stance against religious syncretism. Throughout history, Catholicism had sought to evangelize, to spread its teachings with conviction. Now it seemed hesitant to affirm its own identity, even within its most sacred spaces. Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano, a longtime critic of modern Vatican policies, did not hesitate to call it what he believed it to be: evidence of an infiltration. He spoke of a counterfeit church, a parallel institution operating within the Vatican, slowly replacing Catholicism with a new ideology. To him and others who shared his perspective, the inclusion of the Pachamama was not a simple act of interfaith dialogue, but a sign of a deeper transformation. The response from the faithful was telling. Some viewed the event with unease, while others saw it as a line being crossed. A group of men took matters into their own hands, removing the statues and throwing them into the Tiber River. Their actions were met with both praise and condemnation, but the message was clear. There were still those who refused to accept what they saw as a betrayal of the faith. Whether an isolated incident or part of a larger shift, the presence of Pachamama in the Vatican left lingering questions about the direction the Church was taking and who was truly guiding it. Despite the growing fractures within the Church, one certainty remains: faithful Catholics refuse to surrender. No matter how much institutional structures shift, the essence of true belief cannot be erased. While bishops imposed restrictions and traditional practices are sidelined, devotion persists in the hearts of those who recognize the difference between spiritual leadership and bureaucratic control. As the landscape around us shifts, staying informed is more important than ever. A free ebook is available to help you gain insight, but only while copies last. Find it in the first pinned comment before it's too late. Scattered across the world, small but resolute communities continue to gather in homes, makeshift chapels, and even open fields to celebrate the Mass as it was once practiced for centuries. They seek not rebellion, but preservation, refusing to let external pressures dictate the core of their worship. For them, the Church is not a political institution, but a divine foundation, something eternal, far greater than the ambitions of those who temporarily occupy its highest offices. When the faithful fight, it's not out of nostalgia, but out of belief. They see the problems with the way the Church is run. Bishops who don't say anything when they see corruption, but quickly silence those who stand up for doctrine. A Vatican that talks about being open to everyone, but turns its own traditions away. And a hierarchy that cares more about pleasing modern sensibilities than protecting sacred truths. These Catholics believe that obeying God is more important than obeying authority figures who aren't right. This defiance does not come without cost. Many who refuse to embrace the new direction of the Church find themselves ostracized, labeled as rigid or even schismatic. Some clergy members who stand firm are stripped of their positions, while lay people are dismissed as outcasts within their own parishes. And yet, they persist, knowing that truth is not determined by majority rule, but by divine will. If this message makes you think and you feel it connects with you, don't forget to like it, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment. Also, if you really want to support our work and help us keep creating valuable content, consider giving us a super thanks. Join this amazing community and don't miss any news. Amid the turmoil, one message echoes through the centuries. The Church has endured crises before, and it will endure again. Though infiltrations, betrayals, and doctrinal distortions threaten to obscure its mission, the essence of Catholicism remains untouched in those who hold fast to their faith. The battle for the soul of the Church is not fought in conference rooms or synods, but within each believer who refuses to let go of what is sacred. Even as structures crumble and trust in leadership erodes, a simple truth prevails. Authentic faith cannot be extinguished. It thrives in those who choose to guard it, regardless of the cost.